Hello and welcome back to Freedom Matters with Mark McIntire, your host. Merry Christmas. This is our Christmas show, which is why I'm dressed like a Christmas tree. Today we have a very interesting guest. She actually entered the United States as a legal immigrant from Canada, from Vancouver. And in 1999, she became an attorney, a practicing attorney, who specializes in immigration reform. Her name is Lorraine Woodwark, and I'd like to welcome her to the show. Welcome to our show.
Thank you, Mark.
So, why did you get involved in immigration law? What motivated? I mean, I know you are a legal immigrant to the United States. Did you have a lot of problems when you were entering the country? Whoa, what a question.
It took a long time, but rightly so. I mean, the United States has a right to be able to vet and secure and find out who is coming into their country and make sure that they don't have any criminal backgrounds, they don't have any health histories that are going to be contagious or a problem for the community. So I don't resent that. That is just fine. But what got me involved with immigration was the fact that I noticed during the 1986 amnesty that a lot of people started flooding the border who had not already been there. And we were promised that, one, we were going to get the wall built, and two, the American people were promised that only those people who had resided in the United States for about 8 years would get their citizenship. So with the flooding, all of a sudden, it was just amazing seeing masses and masses of people coming from Mexico and other parts of the world coming in, obtaining false documents, and then applying to get their citizenship, pretending that they'd been here for 8 years. So that really bothered me.
Yeah. Now, in 2019, Lorraine was hired by the Immigration Reform Law Institute, better known as IRLI, as the Director of Attorneys under the flag of the Attorneys United for a Secure America, otherwise known as AUSA. And in this role, you do what? What do you actually do as the Director of Attorneys?
My role as the director is to provide education for the public, but also to recruit attorneys, because we have so many cases going on all the time. It doesn't matter who's in office. We're either doing amicus briefs or legal research or writing articles.
Those are friends of the court briefs.
Friends of the court briefs, right. And we need attorneys to help us out with that aspect. We have a small organization, and having attorneys licensed in all 50 states helps us combat the open borders crowd. And they have thousands of attorneys on their side, and we need to build our group of attorneys as well.
About how many attorneys do you have? You have attorneys at all the 50 states? I
am the first director of AUSA, and so we are slowly building up attorneys. We have a few in each state, but we're trying to get more attorneys, and that's the goal. We can't ask one attorney to handle all the cases. I mean, there are hundreds of cases going on right now across the states, in particular in friendly states towards the open borders crowd. So they're forum shopping and looking for states where the courts are going to rule in their favor and create a burden on the American people.
So before we get into exactly the workings of the immigration system as it now exists here in America, we're going to be discussing the evolution of immigration law from about the 1920s through 1952, and then most especially 1965, in something referred to as the Hart-Celler Bill, which radically changed the whole immigration process and the categories of immigrants and the terms and conditions under which immigrants could enter the United States. We're going to get into all that. But before we do that, since our program, is predicated on drilling down with our guests to the fundamental transcendent principles and values of human freedom that inspire our guests to do what they do, we're going to spend a few moments here of our 58-minute program. We're going to spend a few moments drilling down onto Lorraine's basic bedrock philosophical underpinning of those principles of law that she now is actively engaged in. So let's start with that, Lorraine. How did you formulate your personal ideas about human freedom?
Well, actually, it started in Canada. We learned a little bit about the Declaration of Independence of the United States, the 1776 Declaration of Independence. And we learned how the colonists were upset about the encroachment of England upon the colonists and requiring more taxes and more labor and with very little return and no voice, no representation. And then later, back in 1789, the first Congress voted and approved the United States Constitution with the first 10 amendments, which is the Bill of Rights. And then in 1791, it was ratified. So at that point, that was really exciting. It had, freedom of speech as the First Amendment, with freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of the press, and
freedom to carry a gun.
That was the Second Amendment, but and that's a.
They did the Second Amendment so that nothing would happen to the first. Because when tyrannical regimes take over a state, the first thing they do is they take everybody's guns, and then they start telling you what you can say and what you can't say.
Exactly. Yeah. And so that got me very interested. In 1986, though, in Canada, they got their first constitution. I was excited until I found out what was actually in it. So so if anyone was to say, well, we need to recreate our own constitution, I would say use the United States Constitution. That is by far the most superior constitution that any country in the world has.
How does the Canadian Constitution differ from the American Constitution? Obviously, you're familiar with both, so you're a good person to ask.
Well, the 1986 Canadian Constitution has a whole bunch of limitations as to speech.
Oh.
So the speech is not as free. Oh my gosh.
Some examples? What are some examples?
I'd say, it was about 10, 15 years ago, a pastor in Toronto, who was arrested because the government disagreed with what he taught in his church, in the pulpit. They disagreed with him, so they put him in jail. And they said that he could not speak about that, even though, and he said, well, this is in the Bible, this is what I've always taught. And they said, no, you're violating civil rights of others by disagreeing. I mean, there's other cases going on where somebody says something that the government disapproves of. You can have criminal charges, you can potentially go to jail.
So it resembles Great Britain in that sense, because in Great Britain, I think people know, many pastors and many activists of both persuasions, right, left, and middle, have wound up actually in jail because of the words that they used, which the government, I love that word, government, which the government has determined in their infinite, enlightened, revelatory wisdom that are offensive to other people, and therefore you must not say these offensive words. So England and Canada have pretty much repressive speech.
It does, yeah. It's still a commonwealth of Great Britain.
Right. It still is a commonwealth. Yeah, that's right.
So what's fabulous about the United States Constitution, it was written to protect citizens from the encroachment of government. So it's basically what the rights are. They're God-given rights, and they're given to citizens as opposed to what rights the government has. And so this is a
in Canada, as in Britain, rights do not come from God. They come from the government.
There you go.
So the government determines what rights you have. So there's no objective underpinning for rights except what the government says, and of course the government can change. So your rights can change perpetually.
Exactly. Right, and if you're not the political flavor of the day, you're in trouble.
You wind up in jail.
You might, yes.
Interesting. Okay, so how does Canada handle immigration? How do they have any restrictions? Do they restrict people because of health problems, contagious diseases, because they bring nothing to the table, they don't have any education, they're migrant workers picking strawberries? Or Canada, you don't have strawberries, you have cranberries, don't you?
We have strawberries in Canada,
okay. But sorry about that.
Well, my focus will be on American immigration, but the Canadian immigration system has really changed. It basically depends on who's in government and what the politicians, the powers that be, decide immigration should be. For example, if you are from a Commonwealth country or from Great Britain, you can automatically immigrate and become a Canadian citizen. If you become a citizen of France, or if you already are a citizen of France, you can automatically immigrate to Canada. So they have less restriction, but I know that it's causing them problems, and so.
So if I wanted to enter the nation of Canada illegally, and let's say I just drive across the border, I don't bother to get any permission.
You will be stopped, and you will be arrested, and you will be detained, processed, and then returned to your homeland of origin. And I know this is what used to happen. And then they will send a bill basically to your country of origin and demand that they pay it.
Send a bill?
They'll send a bill. Yeah. Well, they'll send an invoice or a statement.
An invoice.
You owe X amount of dollars.
I would say deduct it from what you owe me.
Deduct it from you.
When I get the invoice, I said just deduct that from what you owe me. So no problem. No problem.
For about 6 months before I came to the United States, I actually worked in William Head Maximum Security Prison. I got to interview inmates in the prison, and my focus was with the foreign inmates. And so I got to interview them to see whether or not they were ready for parole, and what parole meant for a foreigner who's in the country. Would mean that once your parole is once you're ready for parole, they send you back to your country of origin, and then Canada will send a bill to those countries. And so
remarkable.
It was that's what.
So would you say that the enforcement of the Canadian border is stricter or more lenient than the American?
I believe it's stricter, and actually the border of Mexico is a lot stricter as well. Than
try breaking into Mexico sometime, folks.
If you want to go there, but
I'm saying if you want to do it, it's pretty difficult to do. So there are many similar differences with all of the Commonwealth nations, since they are Commonwealth nations, and so they share the idea that freedom and rights actually emanate from government, whereas
or the crown.
The crown. Well, that's. The crown. The Crown's having a kind of rocky relationship right
Let's
now.
not go there.
Let's not even do that. But, rule Britannia, Britannia, rule the waves. Anyway, congratulations on Brexit, by the way. All you British folks out there did a great job. So there's a remarkable philosophical difference, that's what I wanted to get to, between how the Canadians view rights and how Americans view rights. Exactly. Let's talk about gun control. I know we're going to get to immigration. We'll get a long show here, so we got a lot of time to fill here. What's the situation with gun rights in Canada as opposed to the United States?
Again, that depends on who's in power. When I was visiting in 2009, it was interesting. They had a pharmacist was arrested because he defended his pharmacy from a robber at gunpoint. He shot one of the robbers.
Oh dear.
He went to prison.
Oh, right.
And he lost his rights to have a gun.
And the robber was awarded a great deal of money and given a free house and a free car, free education.
No, he sued the pharmacist. Yeah, he was.
He sued the pharmacist. Did he send the pharmacist a bill for being shot?
I think that went through civil court, but it's crazy. I mean, this is why it's so much better to have.
It sounds like everybody's lost their freaking mind on this planet. It's
common sense.
Crazy. Common sense is no longer common. It's uncommon sense right now.
Right.
All right. Let's get.
Well, if you want to continue on with gun control, it's a lot of our guns that are now coming across the border into the United States.
From Canada?
So, no, actually from the southern border.
Oh, from the southern border. Yeah,
we
know that.
There's a lot more restrictions up in Canada, but I mean, we have all sorts of things, including.
But
drugs.
There's no Second Amendment in Canada, right? There's no declaration
that I'm aware of
that the people have a right to keep and bear arms.
You could apply, and you can go through the licensing restrictions, and you can see whether or not you qualify to have a gun. And they're really it's very restrictive, and I haven't actually studied the gun laws in Canada.
Is it popularly accepted and known in Canada, in intelligence circles, educated circles, that the reason why America has the Second Amendment is so that if we ever do get a tyrannical government, we'll be able to take our guns and overthrow that government, because that's what the Second Amendment is all about. It's not about shooting turkeys on Christmas and squirrels in your backyard. It's about overthrowing a sinful and tyrannical regime that has suppressed freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, in other words, the basic issues of the Constitution.
I don't think the rest of the world, let alone Canada, understands the Second Amendment or why it was even passed.
Well, a lot of Americans don't understand it either. So.
No, it's sad. We could talk about education system another time.
Let's dive into what you're here for, which is the whole immigration problem. And I'm glad to hear that you have transcendent principles and values upon which you base your entire work, because so many attorneys don't. Do you know that? I want to tell you an attorney joke. I'm not going to do that.
Oh.
No, I'm not going to do that. Okay. She knows all the attorney jokes. I have a favorite one, but I'm not going to tell it tonight.
Yeah, tell me after.
So how did the principles and the values that you have, Lorraine, how did they inform and enliven your work on immigration? What's the connection between freedom, your principles of freedom, and your perception of immigration rights?
Well, I had the great honor of taking a lot of philosophy classes.
Oh, good.
I started at Santa Barbara City College.
Really?
I took a philosophy 101, and then I got excited about it, and I took another.
Whose class did you take it with?
I actually don't remember that, Professor, but I do remember the philosophy of logic taught by Joseph White.
Oh, Joseph White.
I absolutely loved his class.
Yes.
And that got me very excited. So
he's a very good logic teacher.
He was excellent. I've used his principles for many years.
The only mistake he ever made in logic was hiring me to teach him philosophy.
Oh no.
Yeah, I know. So good.
Yeah, so I got excited, and I took more philosophy classes at UCSB, and I loved it. I was tempted to switch my major, but I didn't. But I used those for electives, and I found that it would be very helpful. We learned about John Locke, we learned about Descartes, the
fundamental principles.
The whole fundamental principles and human nature, and how people, if you give people an opportunity, they will take advantage.
Right.
So there needs to be a morality of laws such as Thomas Aquinas's foundations. So it was basically, I found it was a great transition into law school, and I've used a lot of those principles.
I've been encouraging a lot of people to go to law school, not because they want to become a lawyer like you, but because they want to find out how things actually work in society. And I know a lot of people that have gone to the Santa Barbara College of Law who have a JD degree, and they're very, very pleased that they do, because they really understand how things get done, especially corporate things, education things, legal things, naturally. But what made you go after the law degree? What inspired you to do that?
Well, my parents weren't going to pay for medical school, so I said, well, I'm going to become a rebel and become a lawyer instead.
Right.
So that's.
And you didn't want to major in 13th century French lesbian literature, did you?
No, I wanted something practical that would give me a career.
Something practical, right? Now, a lot of people don't realize that with a JD, you can get hired for a wide variety of things,
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Private foundations, associations like your own Attorneys United for a Secure America, which the director of attorneys with. All right, so now we've only got 40 minutes left of the show.
Oh, no.
So now we're ready actually to dive into you have three major areas that you wanted to cover. First of all, you wanted to discuss why mass immigration is a burden on society.
Well, when you have mass unfettered immigration, you're going to have a population increase that the geographics, the locals may not be able to handle. There'll be too many people coming into an area. It also is difficult on assimilation. When you bring in a slow majority of people, or a slow amount of people coming into the country, you give them a chance to assimilate, learn the language, learn the culture, and basically become a productive member of society, and not a burden, and not somebody who's maybe dissatisfied with the country. So when you do that, it works out well. But when you allow, just open the borders and let people just come on in unchecked, you're bringing in potentially people who may have terrorist backgrounds, and they may have different crimes or different societal problems that they're bringing into this country that we have enough of. There's also unchecked health problems. 1982, the United States eradicated a lot of contagious diseases that are now coming back over the last 10, 15 years. And that was one of the things that concerned me, is we've seen cases of bubonic plague, typhoid, typhus, hepatitis is coming back, and just a variety of things that should not be here because they were already eradicated. And it's just not the way to, it does not help a society with this, mass immigration. Plus, you've got, when you have so many low-skilled workers coming in, they're going to compete for wages and jobs that Americans could be doing, and along with depressing wages, and that's really tough on Americans.
Right. What do you say to folks who disagree with your perception of reality on immigration? What do you say to people who think and say that it is fundamental to human freedom that there should be no borders, that we have a free right to pursue happiness wherever we can find happiness, and that therefore borders are an artificial creation of a suppressive elite that are violating our human rights, our basic human rights to just go anywhere we want and do whatever we want to do? What do you say to that?
I would say they're wrong on a number of things. So they said if you want to pursue happiness, the problem is with human nature, people will go to where there's a plenty. And if they see the United States as a generous country, all of a sudden you're going to have people coming in just for the public benefits. I mean, right now the Border Patrol is reporting anywhere from 60 to 80% of the people coming in are coming in for the free handouts and the public benefits. And that's not fair to Americans. Americans have worked hard for those resources, and it's really meant for Americans who need that assistance, and not for foreigners who could be getting help in their own countries.
I wanted to ask you about how the codicil of asylum,
Right.
the rule of asylum, is enshrined in our current law about immigration, because it seems, as I read reports, I'm not a lawyer, I'm a Jesuit, but I'm not a lawyer, and so as I read reports, the majority of the cases that are brought to trial by people who cross the border illegally from the south, and then they immediately declare that they're political asylum. They file for asylum. What are the criteria for doing that legally? I mean, how could I legally claim political asylum as opposed to how could I fraudulently claim political asylum? You're an attorney, you can explain this to me.
Oh, well, I'll try and unwrap it, but we probably need longer.
I'm pretty stupid, so you better make it simple.
Well, there's basically 5 criteria. It's either religion, race, social group. Oh my gosh, I'm blanking out now.
Social group. Yeah.
Social group.
Sexual orientation, is that one of the things?
No, that is not one of them. It's political affiliation or opinion.
Right.
So if you can claim one of those legally, and if the United States is the first safe country, well, the problem is Mexico is actually the first safe country. So if you're coming from Guatemala, you're really supposed to be declaring asylum within Mexico.
But didn't President Trump work out that agreement with the Mexican government, and that's what stopped the wave of thousands and thousands of people demanding asylum?
It slowed it down, but it doesn't stop people from trying to cross in and still trying to use the same old thing. And the other sad thing, there's a lot of nonprofits within the United States who are using taxpayer funds going to Mexico and South America and advising people how to cheat the system to come in here illegally.
Well, we even have members of Congress who are here in this district, by the way. Our local congressperson, Salud Cabajal, he routinely encourages people to cross the border illegally. He routinely then starts to educate them as to how to avoid detection by ICE and how to avoid prosecution. So we have a member of Congress who's taken an oath to a God perhaps that they don't believe in, to violate the very laws that he has sworn to God to uphold. So then we have the Catholic Church handing out fake names and getting fake IDs. We were talking in the green room about that. So we have not only members of Congress who are violating their oath of office on immigration, but we also have religious groups. And I notice here that religion is the first category that you could use for religious asylum. This seems rather strange going on here.
Ideally, it's if you're being persecuted. For example, in the Middle East, if you're a Christian and you're being persecuted, you should be able to get asylum in the first safe country that you arrive in and be protected because of your Christianity. And I mean, there was all these Yazidis who were slaughtered a few years ago and Christians who were slaughtered because of their faith. And those who could escape, sought asylum in the countries that they reached. So that's really unfortunate. But
So would you say that there should be a codicil that protects people who legitimately seek asylum? Let's say I'm fleeing from, El Salvador is primarily a communist regime, socialist regime. So I'm fleeing from El Salvador, and I go to Mexico. I want to get to the United States, but I have to go through Mexico to do it. Otherwise, I have to take a plane or a boat or whatever. And then, are you saying that we should not have an asylum codicil, or we should?
We do have asylum rules, and we do have laws that need to be enforced. And just for clarification, asylum is for somebody who gets into the United States as the first safe country.
Right.
And a refugee would be somebody who's outside of the country.
Right.
So to answer your question, they should be seeking asylum within Mexico. They should not be able to choose which country they want to go to. I mean, if you're desperate, if you are really in a bad bind and you are really and truly somebody who needs asylum, you should not have that prerogative, or you should not be able to, the ability to be able to go and pick and say, well, let's see, I want to go to, France. I mean, there's probably
someplace warm, plenty of beaches.
Pick and choose the country of your choice.
Santa Barbara would be good.
Just come here. No. I mean, they need to be able to follow. They need to be able to follow immigration laws, and every country has immigration laws, and they need to be enforced.
So if I was in El Salvador, and I was a victim of communism, let's say, just hypothetically, I could knock on the door of our consulate there, and I could apply for asylum right there, could I not? Could I apply
potentially?
Yeah,
potentially you could do that. You could.
See, that's why I always thought that's how you got asylum.
Right.
You went to the consulate of the country that you wanted to flee to, and you applied there, and then if you were granted it, then you could transist. But I guess that's no longer the case. Or?
Well, a lot of people, that's how it's being done now. A lot of people are just saying, hey, I'm going to take a ride up through Mexico and pick my country of choice. But if you're coming from El Salvador, I believe Guatemala now has asylum rules as well.
Oh, really?
Ironically, there's some towns in the United States that are probably more dangerous than some of the towns within Guatemala, just because we've brought in so many people.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the other irony of having the open borders, is we're having people coming in from countries, whereas if you're an American and you're going to be visiting a country, there's the State Department has warnings as to which countries you shouldn't go to, or caution, and yet some of these people from these very countries are coming into the United States unchecked. So we're bringing a lot of the problems from those countries into the United States.
Right. How is the our current homeless crisis connected to the immigration? Do a lot of the immigrants who make it here, are they homeless? Or are they contributing to the homeless problem?
I'm not finding a lot of they're not really immigrants, actually. For starters, if you enter this country illegally, you're an illegal alien, and it's actually a legal term. An immigrant is somebody who applies legally to come to the United States. So if we're talking about an illegal alien who enters this country, I'm not finding a lot of them on the streets. I've actually personally walked down Santa Barbara. I've gone to San Francisco, Los Angeles. I've driven there. I've gone to D.C. and Chicago, and I've seen mostly Americans. I see Americans who are homeless, and I've asked them, I say, you have a nice, I'll say, you have a nice tent, and I go, wow, where'd you get that? And they'll say, well, the housing authority gave it to me.
What housing authority?
The housing authority within Chicago, the housing authority
LA
within D.C. or L.A. or wherever. And they're like, oh, well, why didn't they give you housing? And they go, oh, well, we could no longer afford the rent. They kept raising the rent and pushing us out. And I thought, wow, I mean, housing authority is paid for by taxpayers to provide housing for those in need. Then we also have, well, besides mental illness and drug addiction, I mean, a lot of individuals who suffer from those ailments are ending up on the street because they're spending their money for drugs and alcohol instead of on housing and food that they need. So that's a problem. But I am just not finding illegal aliens homeless.
Well, that's good to hear.
Well, they're actually in the housing that Americans should be living in.
Right. A question I have about the dictionary. You hear people quibbling about the terms undocumented, undocumented what?
Immigrant.
Immigrant,
is what they're calling them.
Undocumented migrant, criminal migrant, criminal alien, and illegal alien. Now you have like 4 terms that are used politically by whoever wants to advocate. So for instance, the more conservative right-wing people, they refer to illegals as criminals. Because they are criminals. If you enter the country, whether it's Mexico or France or Canada, illegally, you are de facto already a criminal. That's what you are. You're not an undocumented person. That seems to be a rather euphemistic
The word undocumented is just a made-up term.
Yeah, it's not a legal term, is it?
No, it is not a legal term. It's just a made-up term to make it sound more pleasant for people who've broken our immigration laws. And an immigrant is a misnomer because, as I said before, you have to legally apply to become a citizen and apply to come here on a visa or apply to come here as a tourist, what have you. And well, actually, a tourist is not an immigrant, but somebody who comes here with the goal of becoming a citizen legally is an immigrant. But everyone else.
Then we have the trend. I guess you can call it a trend, or the situation where pregnant women from other countries they'll somehow get a visa to have a vacation in Florida. And they deliver the baby in Florida, and because the baby is born in the United States, then the baby immediately becomes an American citizen, and then therefore we can't separate the baby from the mother, so we have to keep the mother, and maybe even the father, and maybe even the aunt, the uncle, the grandparents.
Well, that's chain migration.
So that's chain migration, right?
Right. So there's a whole birthing industry, and
industry. Okay.
That's right. A whole birthing industry, and I mean, years ago, I remember where there used to be on the documents, we traveled, my family used to travel a lot, and it used to be on the documents that we attest that we are not pregnant as we flew to
really?
Europe.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, we did. We had to attest that we were not, that no one...
Was this a Canadian rule or an American rule?
I remember as a child I was in Canada, but it was the rule of the country we were flying to, and we had to attest that none of the female passengers were not pregnant in order to get into.
Well, I could certainly attest to that.
Yes,
all the countries I've been, I was never pregnant ever at all. So.
Well, thank goodness.
I know. Thank goodness I was never pregnant.
But that leads into the problem of birthright citizenship, and there never really was. I think it's not even really a law. It's just something that happened. It was maybe an executive order, and I heard that it might have been in 1964 or 1965 by President Johnson then, who just made it that if you can give birth in the United States, you're automatically a citizen. And that's kind of, it goes against the basic principles or what the original intent of the amendment was for birthright and citizenship. And I know that's a big dispute, and that's going probably before the
some
courts.
People have actually referred to this as invading a country through the womb.
Oh, there you go.
Invasion through the womb. In fact, the Muslim invasion of Europe is taking place largely through the womb. Many churches now, formerly Christian churches, and synagogues are now being converted into mosques. There are whole pockets of Great Britain and France where there are no-go zones because they're ruled. They have their own security forces, their own hospitals, their own law courts with Sharia law. So I mean, if you want to invade a country, forget about bombs and airplanes and boats and battleships. Just send a lot of pregnant women across the border illegally, and within a couple of years, you're in charge. You can take it over.
That's part of the problem with open borders. You're bringing in, and you're also not giving people a chance to assimilate. So now they've segregated themselves from the rest of the population, which is really unfortunate.
Well, I want to get to the third. We've talked about the process of immigration and how it is different in the various countries. But one of your items that you have here is the Farm Workers Amnesty Bill. What is that all about?
Well, that was just passed last week by the House, representing just equal number of political parties. And
so Republicans and Democrats voted for this bill. What does this bill say? What's it?
Well, actually, how I like to break down the bill is I say, well, who benefits from this bill?
Right.
And the people who benefit are the special interest, big ag, big agriculture, and our politicians, because it's basically they get their campaign monies. How does it work? If you claim that you worked on a farm for a specified period of time, you get to, if you're an illegal alien and you claim that you've been working on a farm, then you get to apply to get your citizenship. So it's basically an amnesty. And what happens, the problem with that is there's several problems with that. One, that's ripe for fraud, like it was in 1986. And the second problem is once these farm workers get their citizenship, they're going to leave. They're going to leave, and then Big Ag will need to bring in more illegal aliens. So basically, an amnesty it rewards people for breaking the law, and it also encourages more people to break the law.
So this is different from the Bracero program, which California enjoyed through the 1920s and the 1930s, up through actually the Second World War, I believe. And then it was forgotten about when Governor Pat Brown, came into office. And even Cesar Chavez was opposed to.
He was against that.
He was against it. But by that process, if you were a farm worker and you crossed the border to pick strawberries or whatever you were picking, you would only stay here for the harvest season. Then you would go back. You would go back to.
And you didn't bring your family.
And you didn't bring your family. And so. But that's now gone. That's not.
It seemed like it was just phased out quietly without the public noticing. And Canada had something very similar, which the corporations, and it was a much better system because the corporations were responsible for the safety, the health and safety of the employees that they brought in from other countries. So they would fly down. The corporations would fly down to Mexico, temporarily hire some workers. They would give them background checks. They would immunizations, and they'd also check to make sure they didn't have contagious diseases. Then they provided housing and gave them money, paid them
medical
workers. They were protected, they were safe, and they did their job, and at the end of the season they were returned back to Mexico. And it was basically during the 1980s and 90s they came from Mexico.
But this Farm Workers Amnesty bill, does picking tomatoes on my grandmother's backyard, does that qualify me as a farm worker? Because I used to do that in the summertime. I used to help my grandmother pick tomatoes.
Well, I question as to whether or not they really even need to. I think they just have to claim and say that they did. So they can lie.
So there's no teeth in this bill, right?
There's no verification in this bill, and the problem, as I said, it just encourages more people to break our laws.
I wanted to go back to, I'm going to loop back now to what we said at the introduction to the program, which was we're going to actually give our viewers a sort of a brief history of the immigration law in the United States. And I want to talk especially about the Hart-Celler Bill of 1965, which was signed into law by President Lyndon Baines Johnson on October 3rd, 1965, as a result of an initiative done by President Truman to allow 100 Filipino migrants to enter the country, and also even permitted 100 Native Americans to become citizens in the United States. So could you briefly educate us, myself included, about the 1965 Act and how it regulated who could come in to the country based upon national origin as opposed to all kinds of other stuff?
Well, I believe it was kind of almost like a quota or like a lottery system where they started giving preferences to countries that tended to be third world. I mean, I know it's maybe not a nice thing to say, but how do I describe countries where citizens really needed to come here, but they tended to be less educated. They tended to have not quite the same quality of life as they did in the Western world. So you'd get people from Cambodia, Vietnam,
All of Asia.
All of Asia, pretty much, and other parts of the world where people were really needy, and so there was like all of a sudden this mass immigration.
Well, this is a well-intentioned bill because before 1965, the immigration criteria was skewed towards Northern European countries. Those would
Western
be
Europe, yes.
Western Europe, Northern Western Europe, actually. But with the 1965. Preference was given to people who actually were relatives of citizens and people who were from the Eastern European countries and through Africa and through Asia. So it really opened up the categories of people who could come
while
into the
it
country.
narrowed from people from Western and Northern Europe.
Do you think there was an unintended bad consequence of this bill? Or?
Sometimes I have to wonder what the legislators are thinking.
Yeah.
I mean,
maybe they're not thinking. That's probably the problem.
Or they don't know how to play chess or checkers or something. They can't predict the steps ahead. But it also created the way for chain migration. So the moment you set foot in here, you could bring in your relatives and your sisters and your wives and your children and their relatives, and all of a sudden it's just one person can bring in 100 or 200 people with them.
So I can see how this would be very appealing to political parties because it's a good way to get votes. I would suspect. I mean, if I were a political party that depended upon new arrivals into the United States, I'd certainly be in favor of opening the borders on an unrestricted basis, and I would use as my argument that we have a human right to go wherever we want to go in the world, pursue happiness. Do you agree with that?
No, I don't.
Well, why not?
You have a human right to change how your government is working, and I know it's hard. If you need to overthrow if you're within your country and you need to overthrow a tyrannical government, I mean, maybe it's up the obligation of the citizens within that country. It's kind of a shame, and it's really sad, and United States is the most generous country in the world. We donate and give the most amount of relief around the world, but at the same time, we also permit over 1 million people every year to legally immigrate into this country, and that's more than the rest of the world combined. So it's really not fair, and it's not appropriate, and no other country in the world would permit open borders in their countries. So why should the United States have to allow open borders when the rest of the world does not do that?
Well, because everybody wants to come here.
Well,
everybody wants to live in Santa Barbara, and they want to drive a Mercedes.
They can make their country like United States. They can make they can change things.
We've got about 15 more minutes on the show. Okay. My gosh, time does fly on the show. There are two more points I'd like to cover with you.
Okay.
First of all, what is the immediate future of immigration as you see it in the United States? What's the future of immigration? What do you think is going to happen?
Yikes, it's unpredictable.
Yeah.
We have some politicians who I refer to as corrupt. I won't name any names. And
we know who they are.
Well, maybe, that's true. And we have government officials working against the interests of American citizens, which is really unfortunate. Without a closed border and enforcement of our immigration laws, we're going to have chaos. I mean, this country will no longer, it will cease to be United States of America, will cease to become a free country. A lot of the people who come here and don't assimilate, they bring the same problems that they had in their own countries here, and then it all of a sudden becomes a problem within different communities, and no longer, I mean, I think in Santa Barbara when I first arrived here, people had their doors unlocked. Nobody worried about the crime in the 1980s. Now people are afraid of their neighbors, and there are communities up in Lompoc. They just did a gang sweep a couple months ago, and removed a whole bunch of criminal gang members. And already they've had a murder since these gang members have been removed from the community. So unless you get control over the border, control over your immigration laws, we are going to have chaos. We're not going to have United States of America anymore.
Well, also the judiciary seems to have their fingerprints on the recidivism of illegal or criminal migrants who are apprehended breaking the law here. We're constantly reading almost every day about a criminal alien who was arrested, tried, convicted of child molestation or sexual assault or rape or even murder, even multiple murders. They then deported back to their country. They re-enter illegally because our borders are porous. And then as many as 5 times, no matter how many crimes they commit, they're not prevented from coming back to the United States.
That almost seems like the criminal justice is not as strict on illegal aliens as it is for American citizens. And I've found some discrepancies. For example, I think it was just today or yesterday, Washington State is now stating that ICE is not welcome at courthouses.
Right.
And Massachusetts has already done that. And when I worked in the court system, even in Santa Barbara, I had a client who came in for contempt of court for not paying all of his child support payments. He was detained and arrested. He hadn't been convicted of not paying his child support, but yet he was detained and arrested, but yet the courts are now worried about detaining illegal aliens who are using our court systems and coming here. So, and I don't think that's correct. It should not be a sanctuary for, illegal aliens. They've already broken the law, and and we can even go into sanctuary cities and sanctuary states, and it really doesn't protect the citizens. And when laws are enacted, they're supposed to be for the benefit of your citizens and what is going to help your citizens the best. And protecting illegal aliens only protects your criminals, aliens, and basically your politicians.
Yeah,
I guess.
it's very interesting about these sanctuary cities. There's a flip side backlash to sanctuary cities, and some cities are declaring themselves to be sanctuary cities for gun rights.
We'll have to see how that goes. I mean, if it works for criminal illegal aliens,
counties are now. Sheriffs are now saying that we declare that you have a Second Amendment right to have a concealed carry or even an open carry with guns, and they're sort of mirroring the sanctuary cities with respect to immigration. So it seems to me there's a breakdown of federal law or federal law enforcement, both from the state courts and the federal courts, up to the appellate courts. Now, of course, President Trump has been very active with restaffing and filling up. I think he's filled up, 60 or 80 judges at the appellate level. So do you think that the sanctuary city phenomena will be on the decline as resulting from the Trump administration's hyperactivity at appointing conservative justices?
Well, it's unpredictable, but I'm hoping it flips, because Americans need sanctuary. I think it's wrong when criminal aliens are given sanctuary but not Americans, and Americans need to be protected. And that's the whole role of the federal and state and local governments, is to protect the citizens within.
One recent kerfuffle that happened was the congressional award of what's something called e-medical services at the border given to the criminal migrants, and that access before it was given to our veterans.
Right.
There's a big kerfuffle about that. Congress people, including our own here locally, pretend to be for veterans, but yet they place illegal or criminal migrants ahead when it comes to Medicare and medical facilities.
And that is a real travesty. There's a lot of our military veterans are fighting for our freedoms, and here we're rewarding people who've broken our immigration laws with health care. And I think there's Americans out there who would probably like some affordable health care, and yet they're given priority over American citizens. And that's where our taxes are being wasted on, is people who have no business being here, who are committing crimes, who are basically being a burden on our resources, while Americans and our military veterans are getting substandard service. So that's really wrong, and I'm hoping that changes, because I think our military should come first.
What can an average citizen do to make our criminal justice system more responsive to the enforcement of the immigration laws that we have in this country? I mean, can they join your organization as advisors? Can they report people? Because when I called ICE a few times, I got a recording. That's probably them calling back right now. They're listening to the program. Sorry to turn off my phone. But no, I've tried to call ICE to report criminal migrants, and you get a recording. Does your organization, Attorneys United for a Secure America, what's the layperson's role as you see it going forward in that operation?
Well, if you know an attorney who would like to come and work or volunteer a little bit of their time with Attorneys United for a Secure America, just refer them to us. We are picking up steam and we are litigating more cases. They can also donate to our organization. But another thing, and first and foremost, so they don't have to wait, they should be complaining, writing letters to their government, their politicians, and complaining and stating why the law should be enforced, why they should be getting representation instead of representing people who don't belong here. And the other thing they can do is they can start showing up at town halls or city, basically city hearings, or even their board of supervisors or the state government and the federal government. They can show up and start showing that they actually are concerned about it. I know a lot of Americans are working hard and they don't always have the time to go and protest or complain, but even writing a letter or filling out an application online with the Department of Homeland Security, ICE, there's an online application you can do, and you can report and you can demand. If they get enough complaints and if there's enough people demanding change, eventually the government will have to take action. And then with our organization, we are the only voice out there for Americans within the court system. So we are fighting every day for the benefit of Americans, and it's a shame when the government's not working for the benefit of citizens.
Do you detect, as I do, among the general population, a spirit of pessimism as to how the future is going to go? I've asked you about how you think it's going to go, and you say, well, we don't know how it's going to go. But the people I'm talking with, they're talking about moving out of California. Some people are talking about moving out of the United States of America. And ironically, moving to Mexico. If you try to emigrate to Australia or New Zealand, you have to show that you have $1 million worth of financial assets in order to. Now, how many people that are banging on the doors in our southern borders would be able to qualify with a $1 million bond to enter the country?
No, to get smuggled into this country, it costs about $20,000 to $30,000, and then there's more money that you have to pay these smugglers to get in.
We have about 6 minutes left here on the show, but I wanted to get into that area about. Do you think that the American population awakening, the nationalism that's been led by President Trump, do you think that's going to be victorious? Is the ship turning? It's like turning a battleship. It takes 3 miles to turn a battleship 90 degrees. Do you think that this Generation Z, or Generation X rather, do you think that they are going to pick up the gauntlet and say, we have to reform immigration, we have to do what your organization, we have to have standards and practices that protect Americans? Or do you think that it's a lost cause? Are you pessimistic or optimistic?
I am optimistic because I believe in Americans, and I know Americans can do great things. And I've met so many Americans, and I'm planning on traveling to all 50 states.
Good for you as director of the...
Yes, and I have people who are asking me to come visit them and to talk to their groups, and people are getting excited. People are seeing that there is actually a lot of support for getting that border wall finished. They want immigration enforced. They want the government to start representing them instead of people who have broken their laws. So I do see. There are people who feel discouraged at times, but there is an overall optimism, and people really are changing and going, you know what, we do have a chance. And people have been really nice to me on LinkedIn and very supportive and encouraging and saying, you're one of the first people we've heard that is actually pro-enforcement of immigration, pro-enforcement of building and building this, the southern border wall, and making certain that we can start vetting the people who are coming in. We want immigrants, but we want people who are going to provide to the communities that they go into, not people who are going to become burdens.
Well, 2020 is coming up real soon, like next week. Pretty soon, we're going to be in 2020 land. And of course, there are a lot of political elections that are coming up. And what would you recommend for the average voter out there watching our program? What would you recommend? How do they educate themselves, as you have done? How would they educate themselves to adequately judge and vet candidates on the immigration problem? How would they go about that?
Well, I can't speak on politicians, but one of the things, if they want to find out what immigration really is supposed to be about, and articles on immigration, we have some excellent articles
on your website,
on the website, the irli.org
there it
website.
Is. It's right up there on
oh
the
my
screen.
Gosh, there it is. Yes.
Write that down. Write that down.
There, we have videos, we have radio recordings. We also have a lot of articles on our website. Excellent articles, and they can just educate themselves. They're really easy to read. They're wonderful, and you can even buy a Build the Wall mug there too.
For $20. Oh, 25.
25.
It's one of those mugs where if you pour the hot, we were going to do it, but we ran out of facilities to do it. When you pour the water in, it turns from black to.
It says Build the Wall, and then on the other side of the mug it says Make it tall.
Yeah, it's a great way to break the ice. Nothing to do with immigration, but break the ice with people at Starbucks. You know, you can actually have a nice conversation with people at Starbucks. Bill, you might wear your a red hat at the same time.
I can't go on that.
You'll be thrown out. But you know, I wanted to close on a few notes here, and that is that I don't know if you've noticed this or not, but with the legal Latino community, people who have been here a couple of generations, at least one generation. They did it the right way. They came across the border the right way. They became American citizens. They studied their civics. They know the laws. They know the Constitution. They've got jobs. They've got families. They participate in schools. They vote. They're beginning to, and by the way, and church groups, Latino church groups.
That's right.
They're becoming very organized, even here in Santa Barbara County.
Right, they want immigration enforced. They want this border closed. They're very adamant. They're very supportive of our cause. I've met so many Latinos who are very excited about what we're doing, and they want to do more. And so I'm hoping maybe we can get some Latino attorneys as well to join us. It's really there
are some in Santa Maria, by the way.
Oh my gosh, yes. I mean, the majority is on our side for enforcing immigration laws. We are not the minority. There's nothing to be afraid of joining our cause and being a part and loving your country.
Yeah, nothing wrong with that. Well, I want to wish you a Merry Christmas and a happy New Year in your new position. Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
And we have about 48 seconds left, but I did want to say that to you. Thank you very much for being on the show. It was very informative.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and I wish you much success with this. And I know that the work that you're doing is going to be very, very important to the resurrection of law in immigration reform. So
immigration affects everything.
So thanks very much for watching our show, and Merry Christmas to everyone, and we'll see you all later.